the East Coast.
Right.
So today, my goal with this is there's just a lot of misinformation out there. And, if you're going to be working with veterans, whether you're on the real estate side, realtor side, lending side, right? I think we need to know a certain amount of information. Obviously, as lenders, we need to know a lot more than agents. But I think that if the agents can just know the bullet points, right, it's just going to help them more to service their clients, right? And then we can set those expectations. So I want to make this 30 minutes. We're always getting, pushed into Zooms and stuff like that. We're all busy. So I want to keep this 30 minutes. We're going to talk just about eligibility and the different forms. Well, eligibility, what makes a veteran, active duty, guard, or reserve eligible. And then also a surviving spouse as well. I want to touch on that. And then also we're going to talk about, what forms are needed depending on how you serve to prove your eligibility, right? Time in service, character of service, right? To get that coveted certificate of eligibility from the VA. So to set the stage here, last week I was introduced to a veteran. They got connected with a big retail, military lender, and they couldn't pull their certificate of eligibility through the VA, and right away, like, hey, give us your DD-214 form, right? They had it, but it wasn't legible. They couldn't get their certificate of eligibility for 3 months. This veteran was just running around, calling his previous command, doing whatever they can to get that form, right? So I got in touch with them last week. I spoke with him, found out he was actually in the Guard, which is a completely different form, is needed to verify his time in service and his character of service, right? So I was able to get that form, and within 3 days, we were able to get a certificate of eligibility. We're able to move forward, right, with his VA loan. Now we're still going through the pre-qualification process, but let's go through what is required to be eligible for the VA loan, and then what forms are needed. And we'll keep it very surface level, 30,000 foot, view. I don't want to dive too much deep into it. But let's start with active duty, Justin. What's the time requirements as far as how long do you need to be in active duty to be eligible for a VA loan on that?
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely. So happy to be out here and, again, tapping down on that. There's so much misinformation out there when it comes to VA loans. I mean, I deal with it daily, and it's like I almost get frustrated with it. And I have to kind of temper myself down because, I've got so much built up just frustration with the overall industry as a whole that we can't get the message out there. So that's why doing things like this is so important, to just make sure that we're spreading the proper news and the proper guidelines as it comes from the VA. Big thing on that is so many veterans go in misinformed, and they make a terrible financial decision because they're misguided by somebody, and so that's exactly what we're here to tamp down on. So when we're talking about active duty guys, right, trying to see if they're VA eligible, if you've done 4 years active duty service, you're good to go. You've got nothing to worry about. Anybody who has, done 90 days of active service, you're also going to qualify. And what's actually really cool is, so let's say you were activated, you were deployed, whatever, you went on Title 10 orders. You don't actually have to have 90 days consecutively anymore. So they actually changed it. There was congressional legislation back in 2021.
I don't mean to cut you off, Justin. We'll get into Guard Reserve. Right? I want to break this down. So just active duty, right? So Justin was saying 90 days of active duty service, right? At that point, right, you get through boot camp, basic training, MOS training, tech school, AIT, whatever your branch calls it, right? You're going to hit your 90 days pretty quick. At that time, you'll be eligible for a VA loan, and then we'll be able to pull your certificate of eligibility automatically through the VA, right? And so that's active duty. Active duty is super simple. You're in that. So that's active duty. Now let's talk about veterans like you. Well, actually more so me. You're still doing a little bit of service. Veterans who've already served their enlistment, they're out back in the civilian population. God help them. And as a veteran, right, that's when the DD 214, that's where everybody defaults to, right? So as a veteran, you've already done your service, that DD 214 form, that's what we need, right? And that's what we're looking at, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that DD 214 is major key. Like we tell everyone, make sure you get get a few copies of your DD 214. Like I think I printed off like 6 copies of my original one. I still have some of them today because it's super important, because sometimes you can actually request your DD14 and you can get it back and it comes in, and I have one, it's all grayed out. I don't know exactly how it got to that point or why, but everything is so grayed out that it's illegible. And when we submit that to the VA, if we don't get that automatic approval when we pull someone's certificate of eligibility, we have to submit that DD214 in. They're not going to be able to read it,
Right.
So you want to make sure that you have copies of that DD214 on hand, your own copies, because that's major, is when we have to submit that,
Yeah,
And
and then
that's
if a veteran doesn't have it, they can always go to their e-benefits website. There's other
Yeah.
resources that they can go. They can go back to their last command where they their end of enlistment, right? That's another one that I know that we talk about in our group, is going back to your last command post, right, and obtaining that documentation with that.
Yeah.
And so,
National Personnel Records Center. I've got my little cheat sheet over here. They
yeah,
can go to archive.gov. They can go to, NPR. They can get it from there.
Mhm.
There's all different resources. They just have to know. We have to be the ones as professionals to be able to give them that resource, that knowledge.
Yeah.
They already have it.
And that's the difference, right? Is working with, I often say, like, every mortgage company, every loan officer can do VA loans, right? But there's a difference between, do you do VA loans or do you know VA loans, right?
Yeah, well,
And in this instance, a big retail company that says they're for veterans, right, had this veteran run around in circles. He sent me his documentation. I'm like, oh shoot, I can use this. Boom, 3 days we had a certificate of eligibility, and we're rocking and rolling. Getting them to the house. So that's going to be the difference with that. So all right, so veterans, they've done the enlistment. They need a DD 214 form. There's multiple resources that we could provide to them to get that. The big one that a lot of people get tripped up on is National Guard and Reserve, right?
Yeah.
That's the big one, because they don't use a DD 214 form. There is an instance, right, that they'll have a DD 214 form. So let's talk about National Guard. Again, let's keep it 30,000 foot, view, just general. And then what would be an instance if they would have a DD 214 form?
So, perfect question. I started to kind of jump ahead. Like I do this thing where I get like so much knowledge, and I'm just like, oh, I got this. I literally wrote something down that I was like, oh yeah, this is a good point I want to bring up too. But for reserves and guard, it's a little bit tougher, right? So they tell us, hey, you have to have 6 satisfactory years of service. So that's 6, not 90 days, not 4 years. But if you are in the reserves or the guard and you activated on Title 10 orders, meaning you're now active duty for a period of time, now you that's one of those qualifying events for VA eligibility. So you have to be on Title 10 orders. So you can say it's a deployment, whether you deploy to Afghanistan or to Kuwait, which they say isn't a real deployment, but I can't say nothing because I never went to either. So you went to Kuwait, or even if you just deployed to Norway, like myself, right? You get a DD 214 for that. You want to keep that DD 214 because that's a DD 214 for your ending of your active service. Doesn't mean you're done, you're out of the reserves, the guard or whatnot, but you're going to get a DD 214 for that. And that's one of those specific events that we can use. We started to touch upon it. You can also, let's say you were activated during COVID. A lot of guard, a lot of air guard, a lot of different reserve components got activated during COVID to help out. And some of those activations weren't for a full 3-month period because it was a precarious situation. We didn't know how long it would last for. But if you have 90 days of cumulative service. So like you did 30 here, 30 here, and 30 there, as long as you have 91 days technically, you're good to go. You would get a DD-214 for all 3 of those periods. And that's basically what we would submit for one of those qualifying events. I don't know if you wanted to touch upon the 6 years of SAT service and your scenario and what you had to get for your guy.
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially with Guard and Reserve. I talk to so many Guard and Reserve members, right? They enlist, right? They get through all of their training. They're at their unit, right? They do a couple of drills and they're like, hey, I want to use my VA loan. And I'm like, well, cool. Call me back in 5.5 years, right? And make sure that you drill most every weekends and make sure you have qualifying years, right? You have to accumulate enough points every single year to have a qualifying year. You have to have 6 years, right? And that's where a lot of Guard Reserve members fall short, is they don't fully understand that process, because it's a whole different, game compared to active duty or veterans, right? And so, yeah, so Guard Reserve, 6 years of 6 credible years, 15 points per year. So make sure you're drilling, making sure you're hitting those points. And then the big one is character of service has to be honorable. Anything other than honorable is a no-go, right? Like active duty, you could have a medical, right? You could have whatever have you, as long as it's not dishonorable, right? That's exactly, that's going to be a big difference. It's a lot tighter. So with that, and so that's the big point is, making sure that we have 6 years, right? And the form is different. It's different for each unit. But in my case, my veteran was Army. So it was called an NGB 22 form, right? And don't expect agents to know that, but as a professional, we need to know that. If I'm going through all of his 100 documents and I see that, and I see, obviously his statement of service too, that he did 9 years, he has a character of service of honorable, and I'm like, boom, that's all we need, right? Submit it to the VA, give them 3 business days, you'll have a COE issued, with all that information on there. So
yeah, and it's great too, because I had a good story where I had a veteran approach me, right? He did regular reserves, he got out. He didn't actually know that I did VA loans somehow. He was just a friend of mine. He was at a different unit. He started off with another lender. He was there for a month, and they were trying to help him find his COE for a full month. Mind you, this guy was under contract. He was under contract. This is a very reputable veteran mortgage friendly company. It's got one of those trigger terms in their title that any vet's going to look at and be like, oh, that company's for me. So I was actually kind of astonished that they had actually dropped the ball on this. Not only did they pre-approve him without a COE, but they let him get under contract without a COE. And so he was about 2 or 3 weeks out, and one of his underwriting conditions was, hey, we need to get a COE so we can order a VA appraisal. Right. So he finally came to me. He kept trying to submit his DD-214. He had one of those initial training, DD-214s. And I was like, okay, well, that's not where you're going to submit. You need to submit a point statement, and you need to submit your honorable discharge cert. Right. He had just gotten out from his unit within the last 12 months. So rather than having to go to the headquarters branch of whatever, the headquarters of whatever branch it was, we didn't have to go to headquarters Marine Corps or headquarters of the Army Reserve or headquarters of the Navy Reserve, the manpower branches. I was able to call up the unit with him on the line, get his point statement, and get his honorable discharge cert right away. We were able to get his COE. As soon as I got it, we were able to upload it into the portal. And then what I did is I kept him on the line, and I actually called the VA, and they looked at the application right away. Like, the VA is super helpful when we call them as professionals, because they need to and they want to help vets. It's not like the healthcare side, which I just came from before. I was just at a VA appointment. I can't bash them too much. My primary is all right. She's pretty all right. But they're there, like they answer right away. There's no hold time. And, this woman picked up, she helped me out and she was like, I'm sending you a COE right over. So it was a
Mhm.
2 business day turnaround for me to get all of that for him. The other lender, it took a full month and they
Yeah.
couldn't do the task because they just didn't know.
Yeah.
It's not that they didn't want to, it's just that they had no idea how to do it, and the point statement and the honorable discharge, sir, those are things that if you have been out for a little while and you were reserves, it might take a little bit longer. So if you're thinking, like if you have a client who's thinking about buying in the next 12 months, or you are looking into getting a house in the next 12 months and you're a vet, you have to get on top of it now, because I had one
Yeah.
that took 4 months to get to.
Well, and that's the important thing, is that when it comes to, you're either going to get lucky and get your certificate of eligibility right away, right? Put your social, year of birth, boom, we got it, right? We can move forward. And I want to touch on that before we kind of wrap things up. But that's why it's important that, and look, I help a lot of loan officers and I help a lot of agents that I'm not even the loan officer on the deal. The fact of the matter is that you just need to know a lot of information. And really our mission is to just help making sure that, obviously I want to get deals closed, but I also want veterans to get their deals closed. And there's a lot of misinformation. And so yeah, just make sure that you have a resource available to you that you can reach out and say, okay, this is what I want to do. Let's get all our ducks in a row,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so last two things that I want to touch on, right? I want to touch on surviving spouses, okay? How a spouse can get a COE. And then I want to talk about how important it is to make sure you are eligible, right? We call it the golden ticket, right? You have your golden ticket or your COE before you get under contract, right? So let's talk about surviving spouses first, and then we'll do the COE, and then we'll kind of wrap things up from there. So.
So it just cut out on my feed for real quick.
So we're going to talk
what was
about
it that you
surviving
said?
spouses here. So surviving spouses. So, if you're a spouse of a veteran, you can actually obtain a certificate of eligibility if your spouse who served in the military obviously passed away due to service related, right? There's a lot of intricacies with that, but the hard and fast rule is service related, right? So if you are a surviving spouse of a military member and they passed away due to service related, whether you're a veteran or active duty, there's an opportunity for that surviving spouse to obtain a certificate of eligibility and then utilize the VA home loan benefit. And so, if, agents and loan officers, if we're having conversations, right, I always ask, and sometimes I get a chuckle and a no, or sometimes I get a yeah. And I'm like, hey, are you or your spouse, either you or your spouse ever serve in the military, right? You're either going to get a no or yes, right? But then you might get that story, be like, no, I didn't, but my husband or my wife did. And, unfortunately they passed away, right? So that should be a light bulb that goes off to where, okay, let's start going down that road and see if we can get your COE if you don't have that already,
Yeah.
with that.
And
so
that's a big thing, any Purple Heart veterans, or people who were KIA or anything like that, God gave the ultimate sacrifice. They get it, they get that COE.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right. So we got about 10 minutes. I want to hit the 30-minute mark. So we have 10 minutes. I want to talk about and you were talking about the story. I was going to talk about it. How important is it to verify a veteran, military member, let's just say military member, is eligible before they get under contract? Because you can be pre-qualified for a VA loan, but not eligible. You could be eligible, not pre-qualified. Another individual said that, so props to him for that phrase or whatever you want to call it, but it's a really good phrase. So, you've had many stories. I've had stories where a veteran is under contract but does not have a certificate of eligibility, and there's a documentation issue, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to close without a COE. So yeah, let's just reemphasize how important it is to have a COE before you get under contract.
So I have another good story too. I got two good ones. I'll say this one, but so similar scenario. I had basically at my old unit down in Quantico. Somebody told me, oh, hey, so and so. I'll just call him, Johnson or whatever. Johnson is trying to buy a house, and he was having some trouble getting his COE because he doesn't have his DD 214. And that's like the misconception that everyone has, that it like DD 214 is a great asset, and a lot of the times it's what's going to get you that COE. But if you're in the active duty, like this guy, he was active duty. He was a member of weapons training battalion with me. Awesome dude, squared away. But he's looking for his DD 214. I'm like, dude, like
you don't have it, man. Statement of service.
You're still doing it.
Yeah.
You know, so we have to get a statement of service, and statement of service is really easy to get.
Right.
I like this because look, if they're still active duty right now, getting a statement of service is literally just call up their admin shop. You know, call up their adjutant. You know, call up their adjutant is just like an officer who is in charge of an administration shop, basically.
Right.
On Marine side, we call it the S1. I don't know what it's called on Army side, but you know, it's got all different terms. So what was funny was, because I was on base at the time, we were able to walk over to the adjutant's office, and I went up to the adjutant. I was like, "Hey, sir, you know, can you get me a statement of service for Johnson here?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, for sure." You know, and I ended up actually helping him close, because he ended up starting to work with me, because he's like, "Oh wow, that was really easy. I looked like the hero." You know, and that's the greatest thing, is when we are knowledgeable as, you know, veteran support advocates. I like to throw that out there. Not that if there's an official term, whatever, but when we're an advocate for veterans, like there's nothing greater than helping someone out and having them look at you like a hero when you did something that's just so simple and second nature to you. You know, and that was major key, you know, is making sure that they get that COE, you know, because it's not a guarantee that you're going to get it. Just because you took the oath doesn't mean that you get it. You know, there's a lot of things you get just because you took the oath, but getting your COE, it's not a right necessarily. It's almost like a privilege, you know, like you have to make sure, like you were saying before, the character discharge for anyone in the reserves. And funny enough, I had a scenario where somebody had previously gotten a COE. They were in the reserves. They got it erroneously. Okay. They were able to get their house with a VA loan. I was trying to refinance them. This was in 2020 or 2021 when the rates all shot down to like the twos. I was trying to refinance this guy, and I was like, "Oh yeah, sure." Quoted him, drew up the whole file, submitted it in. I didn't get his COE. So I started submitting documents. I finally called the VA, and they were like, "No." I was like, "Well, how does he not get it?" They were like, "Well, he hasn't had the 6-year time requirement." And I was like, "Yeah, I know that, but he bought this house 2 years ago, and he's only been in for 5 years. So he had 3 years when he bought it. He got a COE." And they actually did some digging, found out that they gave it out erroneously. Ooh. So he wasn't able to refinance at that point. He had to wait. You know, we had to wait with him another year to refinance.
Yeah, that sucks.
Just because you got a COE before doesn't mean you can.
But that's a really good point. And like maybe at some point we'll talk about, you know, bonus entitlement, second tier entitlement. But that is an ugly truth that happens so often. You could be under contract. If you don't have a certificate of eligibility, you're not going to close on that loan. So, you know, or if you don't have enough entitlement left over, and that's a whole nother conversation. The VA, just because they served, just because they were in Afghanistan, they were Joey G.I. Joe, and they were just doing whatever, you know what I mean? They're putting 20% down, 740 FICO score. It doesn't matter. The VA is not going to approve your loan if you don't have a certificate of eligibility. So that eligibility is super important, and it's on us, right? And a little bit on, you know, the veteran to make sure that their loan officer is getting what they need. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so that's the important thing with that. So. All right, cool, man. We are just under the 30-minute mark. So just a really quick recap. You know, one, eligibility is key. You got to make sure that you have that eligibility put in place before you get under contract. If you don't have that certificate of eligibility, don't proceed, right? Making sure that that loan officer is doing what they need to do, get that certificate of eligibility. So that way we are closing on that file for sure. And then kind of from there, just because you served doesn't mean you're eligible for a VA loan, right? You could be pre-qualified or not eligible. You could be eligible, not pre-qualified. How you served there's going to be different forms that are going to show your character of service and also your time in service. And depending on if you're active, veteran, National Guard, Reserve, it's all going to be different requirements, different forms. But that's why it's important that, I think a lot of us say it's important, who you work with matters, right? And so that's important because there's a lot of veterans out there that are running around trying to find forms that either A, don't even exist, or B, they don't even have, you know what I mean? And they never will have because of their type of service, right? And so that's why it's important working with, individuals that know the VA handbook, know what's needed, and can really just push through and get things done and executed on time with that. And then ultimately at the end of the day, closing deals and helping veterans,
Mm-hmm.
But all right, good stuff, Justin. I appreciate you jumping on with me with that. I think this is a lot of good info. Let's keep up the good fight. But couple questions. I appreciate you, Mark. Great info. Yep. Good there. So, all right, guys. Hopefully this is helpful. Thank you, Justin. I appreciate it. You guys have a good one. Yeah, man.
All right.
Later.
Take care.
See ya.